You put tomato plants in the ground every spring the same way most of us do. You give each one 3 or 4 feet of space, good soil, a wire cage, and you wait. By August, you pull maybe 20 or 30 tomatoes off each plant if the weather cooperates. A respectable harvest. Nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing that makes the neighbors stop and stare either. 10 years ago, that was exactly where I stood. Then I spent an afternoon helping my Amish neighbor Daniel tie up plants in a patch no bigger than a large dining table, roughly 10 square feet. 4 tomato plants climbed 7-foot wooden stakes, each one loaded with fruit from about a foot off the ground all the way to the top. I stopped counting at 60 tomatoes on a single plant, 4 plants, more fruit than I was getting from an entire long row. Daniel shrugged when I pointed it out. He said something I have never forgotten. You do not give the plant choices, you give it a job. That one sentence changed how I grow tomatoes. Today I am going to walk you through the exact system the Amish use to pull massive harvests out of tiny spaces. 5 clear steps. By the end you will see how the numbers add up to 150, even 200 tomatoes from a patch most of us would walk past without a second thought. Stick with me all the way through because I am going to share the simple planting hole recipe Daniel used for every tomato he ever set in the ground. It takes 2 minutes and the difference shows up in the first week. Before we start the steps, let me tell you where I was. I grew tomatoes the conventional way, plants spaced 3 to 4 feet apart in a long row, wire cages around each one, left to do their own thing. They bush out, sprawl through the cages, and by midsummer I am hunting for fruit hidden inside a tangled mess of stems and leaves. 30 to 40 tomatoes per plant on a good year. A lot of garden space for that yield, and half the fruit ends up rotting on the ground where branches sag. I thought that was just how tomatoes grew. Daniel's vertical system showed me I had been letting the plants waste most of their energy on leaves and sideways growth instead of directing it into fruit. Here is how to change that, starting with the ground those plants go into. Step 1 is the intensive bed. When you ask 4 to 6 plants to produce at this level in only 10 square feet, the soil has to be exceptional. Not merely decent, exceptional. You are concentrating a huge amount of production into a small root zone, so that zone needs to be packed with nutrition and living biology. Mark out a bed roughly 2.5 feet wide by 4 feet long, or any shape that gives you about 10 square feet. Raised beds work perfectly. In the ground, just focus all your effort on that marked area. In the fall, or at least 4 to 6 weeks before your last expected spring frost, work 3 to 4 inches of finished compost into the top 8 to 10 inches of soil. Go deeper than you usually do. On top of that, add a 1-inch layer of well-aged manure. Horse or cow manure that has sat for at least 6 months is ideal. It supplies slow-release nitrogen and another wave of microbial life. If you have leaf mold, add a 1-inch layer of that too. Leaf mold brings the fungal network that helps roots pull nutrients more efficiently and holds moisture like a sponge. Compost and aged manure alone will still get you most of the way there. The goal is a root zone so rich and alive that the plants never run short during the heavy production months of July and August. Daniel's beds had been built up for decades, yet he still added fresh compost and manure every single fall. Even the best soil needs to be fed when you ask it to work this hard. Heavy clay begins to open up within the first season. Sandy soil holds water and nutrients far better. You will feel the difference in your hands within a few months. What you build above that soil matters just as much. Step 2 is vertical staking. This is where the Amish approach separates itself from the way most of us grow tomatoes. Forget the wire cages. Cages are built for plants that bush and sprawl, and that is exactly what we are trying to stop. The Amish use tall, sturdy single stakes, or a simple trellis that trains each plant straight up, not outward. Drive a wooden stake, or a length of heavy-duty rebar into the ground beside each planting spot. The stake needs to stand 7 to 8 feet above the soil, which means you start with an 8 or 9 foot piece and bury a foot of it for stability. Hardwood stakes or metal T-posts both work. The important part is that they do not flex or wobble. These plants will be loaded with fruit by midsummer, and a flimsy stake will bend or snap. Space the stakes 18 to 24 inches apart inside your 10 square foot bed. In a 2.5 by 4 foot bed, that gives you room for 4 to 6 plants. 4 plants at 24-inch spacing is the sweet spot for airflow and production in most regions. In longer season zones 7 through 9, you can push to 5 or even 6 plants at 18-inch spacing because you have more weeks before frost. As each plant grows, tie it to the stake every 8 to 10 inches with soft cloth strips, old t-shirt material, or garden twine. Never use wire or anything that can cut into the stem. The tie should be firm enough to support the plant, yet loose enough for the stem to thicken. You are training every plant into a single column of production. All the energy goes up, all the fruit forms along that central column. Nothing touches the ground. Another method that works beautifully in a small space is the Florida weave, which the Amish use extensively in their market gardens. Set stakes at each end and between every 2 plants. Then weave a single line of heavy garden twine along both sides of the row at 8-inch intervals as the plants grow. The twine sandwiches the stems between 2 lines and supports them without individual tying. It is faster to set up and works especially well with 4 or more plants in a line. Either method does the same job. Plants grow vertically. Fruit is easy to reach and stays off the ground. Air moves freely around the foliage, which cuts disease pressure. You are using vertical space instead of horizontal space. Daniel's plants reached 7 feet by midsummer and were still setting fruit at the top when the first frost arrived. Standing next to them felt like standing in front of a green wall covered in tomatoes. Growing vertically is only half the equation. The other half is what you take off the plant. Step 3 is pruning. I will be honest, this is the step most gardeners resist. It was the hardest one for me to accept. The first time I watched Daniel prune, I thought he was destroying the plants. He walked the row with sharp shears and removed what looked like half of each plant, side shoots, lower branches, leaves below the first fruit cluster. I watched him strip beautiful bushy plants down to a single main stem with a few fruit clusters, and everything in me wanted to stop him. I kept quiet because I had already seen his harvest, and his harvest was 3 times mine. Here is what he was doing and why it works. Indeterminate tomato plants, the type the Amish grow for this method, produce suckers. A sucker is a new shoot that sprouts in the V where a side branch meets the main stem. Leave it and it grows into a whole new stem with its own branches and fruit. That sounds productive. More stems should mean more tomatoes. In practice, it does the opposite. Every sucker diverts energy from the main stem. The plant spreads itself thin. Fruit stays smaller. Much of it never fully ripens before frost. All the extra foliage creates a dense canopy that traps moisture, stops airflow, and invites early blight and septoria leaf spot. Daniel pruned each plant to 1 or 2 main leaders. 1 leader means you remove every sucker, so the plant puts everything into a single vertical stem. 2 leaders means you allow 1 strong sucker near the base to become a second stem and remove everything else. Either way, you focus the plant's energy like a laser. Instead of 100 small half-ripe tomatoes scattered across a sprawling bush, the plant produces 40 to 60 full-sized, fully ripe tomatoes on a clean vertical column you can reach without bending or digging through leaves. Start when the plant is 12 to 18 inches tall. Check the leaf axils every week, the joint where a side branch meets the main stem. When you see a sucker, a tiny new stem with small leaves, pinch it off with your fingers while it is 2 to 3 inches long. It snaps cleanly, and the wound heals fast. If a sucker gets bigger than about 4 inches, use clean shears rather than tearing, which can damage the main stem. Also remove all leaves and branches below the lowest fruit cluster. Those lower leaves contribute little to photosynthesis by midsummer, yet they sit close to the soil where blight spores splash up in the rain. Taking them off improves airflow at the base and sharply reduces disease. I prune every week, usually on a morning walk, 2 minutes per plant. It feels aggressive at first when you are holding a healthy-looking branch you just cut off. Within a couple of weeks, the difference is obvious. The fruit that remains gets bigger, it ripens faster. The plant looks clean, open, and healthy instead of overgrown. Daniel used to say pruning is not about taking away. It is about telling the plant where to put its strength. That principle shows up in a lot of Amish work, and it works here. What I have shared so far is a real piece of the system, yet it is still only one piece. If you want the complete day-by-day plan so you know exactly what to do and when, look at the guide I put together. It is called the 30-Day Amish Pest-Proof Garden Protocol. Everything I have learned from my Amish neighbors over 3 decades is organized into a simple plan you can start this season. It covers the 5 defense layers that build a garden that protects itself from the soil up: the complete 4-bed crop rotation that stops disease and pests before they gain a foothold, and a companion planting field guide so you know exactly what to grow next to what and why. You can click the link in the description below this video. If you are watching on a television or computer, open the camera on your phone and point it at the QR code on screen. It takes you straight to the guide. No searching, no typing. Now the fourth step. Step 4 is choosing the right varieties. Not every tomato is built for this system. You need indeterminate varieties, plants that keep growing and setting fruit until frost kills them. Determinate varieties grow to a fixed height, produce all their fruit in a short window, and then stop. They have their place, but for intensive vertical growing you want the plants that never quit. These are the varieties Daniel grew, and the ones that have given me the best results. Brandywine is an heirloom indeterminate that produces large, meaty, intensely flavorful fruit. It is not the absolute heaviest yielder, but the quality is outstanding, and each tomato is substantial. Cherokee Purple is another heirloom that performs well vertically, with rich complex flavor and better disease resistance than many heirlooms. San Marzano is a paste-type indeterminate that sets heavy clusters of elongated fruit. If you are counting total tomatoes, San Marzano is hard to beat because of how prolifically it sets. Rutgers is an older variety the Amish in my area have grown for generations, reliable, productive, and heat-tolerant. For shorter season zones 4 and 5, look for Early Girl or Stupus. Both are indeterminate, start producing earlier, and give you more time before frost. Plant varieties you know perform in your specific zone. In a 10-square-foot bed with 4 plants, I recommend 2 of your best main crop variety and 2 of a heavy producer like San Marzano. That mix of quality and quantity adds up fast. Avoid the temptation to grow too many different types in such a small space. Step 5 is succession planting. This is the step that takes a good harvest into a remarkable one. Most of us plant every tomato on the same day in late spring and hope for the best. All the plants mature at roughly the same time, produce heavily for a few weeks, then slow down as they age and the fruit load builds. You get a glut in August and then not much afterward. The Amish stagger their plantings. Daniel did not put every tomato in the ground on the same day. He planted the first wave about 2 weeks after the last expected frost, a second wave 2 to 3 weeks later, and sometimes a third wave 2 to 3 weeks after that. Each wave was started from seed indoors or bought as transplants, so the plants were ready to go in at the right time. The result is overlapping production windows. The first wave produces heavily in July and early August. The second wave hits its stride in August and September. A third wave, if you have the season for it, carries you right to the first frost. In zones 7 through 9, 3 waves are very achievable. In zones 5 and 6, 2 waves are more realistic. In zone 4, you can still manage 2 waves if you start the second round indoors early and use row covers or other season extenders. Here is where the numbers come together. 1 well-pruned indeterminate plant on a vertical stake in deeply enriched soil can produce 40 to 60 tomatoes over a full season. 4 plants in your 10-square-foot bed give you 160 to 240 tomatoes in a single wave. Even with 2 waves using the same bed, by replacing spent early plants or adding a second small bed, you stretch that production across the entire season. Daniel's approach was a little different. He kept 4 plants going in that small space all season and managed them so intensively they never slowed down. Weekly pruning, consistent watering, and that extraordinary soil kept the plants at peak longer than mine ever did without the system. My best year was about 180 tomatoes from a 10-square-foot bed. Daniel consistently hit 200. The difference was decades of built-up soil and the discipline of weekly pruning. I am still catching up. A few patterns show up again and again in conventional tomato growing, and the Amish method handles each one differently. The first pattern is wire cages and letting plants bush out. Cages are convenient, yet they encourage exactly the sprawling growth that limits production. Energy is divided among dozens of stems. Much of the fruit ends up shaded, small, or resting on the ground where it rots. Vertical stakes and training concentrate energy and keep every tomato off the ground and in the light. The second pattern is never pruning suckers. Most home gardeners leave every sucker because more growth looks like more production. What you actually get is more leaves, more disease, and smaller, slower ripening fruit. The Amish prune aggressively because fewer, stronger stems produce more usable fruit than a dozen weak ones. The third pattern is planting everything on the same day, A single planting date means a single harvest window with a peak and a decline. Succession planting stretches that window across months and levels out the harvest so you are never overwhelmed and never without tomatoes. The fourth pattern is spacing plants too far apart out of habit. Conventional spacing of 3 to 4 feet makes sense for sprawling bushes. When you grow vertically and prune to 1 or 2 liters, 18 to 24 inches is plenty. You are using the vertical space above, not the horizontal space around. None of these conventional habits will ruin a garden. They simply leave production on the table. Adding the Amish layer of vertical staking, focused pruning, and succession timing to what you already know can double or triple the harvest from the same amount of space. Now the planting hole recipe I promised at the beginning. Daniel did this for every single tomato he planted, and it is so simple, I almost did not believe it would matter. Dig the hole about twice as wide and twice as deep as the root ball. Into the bottom put 2 generous handfuls of finished compost, 1 teaspoon of bone meal, and 1 tablespoon of crushed eggshells that you have saved and dried over the winter. Mix those into the soil at the bottom with your fingers. Set the transplant deep, burying the stem up to the lowest set of leaves. Tomatoes root along any buried stem, so planting deep gives you a much larger root system right from the start. Fill in around the plant with a mix of native soil and a little more compost. Water it in well. Mulch around the base with 3 to 4 inches of straw, leaving a 2-inch gap around the stem. The bone meal supplies slow-release phosphorus for root development and fruiting. The eggshells add calcium, which helps prevent blossom end rot, one of the most common frustrations in tomato growing. The extra compost gives the roots immediate access to rich biologically active material exactly where they need it. I have been doing this for about 8 years. The difference in early growth is visible within the first week. Plants that receive this treatment establish faster, flower sooner, and set fruit more heavily than plants set without it. 2 minutes per hole, almost no cost. Try it this spring and see for yourself. What I have shared today is a real piece of the puzzle, yet it is still only one piece. If you are tired of fighting the same battles every season, if you want a garden that works with you instead of against you, look at the guide I put together. The 30-day Amish Pest-Proof Garden Protocol contains everything I have learned from my Amish neighbors over the last 3 decades, organized into a simple day-by-day plan you can start this season. It covers the full 5 defense layers that build a garden that defends itself from the soil up, the complete 4-bed crop rotation that stops disease and pests before they ever gain a foothold, and a companion planting field guide so you know exactly what to grow next to what and why. There are 2 easy ways to get it. Click the link in the description right below this video, or, if you are watching on a television or computer screen, take out your phone, open the camera as if you are going to take a picture, and hold it up to the QR code on screen right now. A link will appear at the top of your phone. Tap it, and you go straight to the guide. No typing, no searching. Either way works. I believe it is the best investment you can make in your garden this year. That is what I have learned from my Amish neighbors about growing more tomatoes in less space than I ever thought possible. I still remember standing in Daniel's garden that first time, counting the fruit on a single plant, and realizing I had been thinking about tomato growing all wrong. It was never about giving the plant more room. It was about giving it a job, and everything it needed to do that job well. If any of this changes how you look at your tomato patch, I would love to hear about it in the comments. If you have a variety or a technique that has worked well for you over the years, share it. We all learn from each other. Thanks for spending this time with me. I will see you in the next one.